Production support for InFocus is provided by Smithville, a locally owned business serving central and southern Indiana since 1922 with residential and business internet, voice, and security services. Smithville, local pride, global technology. Information at smithville.net. Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for central and southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
During the 2011 legislative session, Indiana House Democrats protested a majority Republican agenda by staying in Illinois for nearly 5 weeks. During their absence, House Republicans continued to demand education reform, and in April, House Bill 1003 was passed. The law allows children from poorer backgrounds to have their families apply for state scholarships or vouchers, which they can then spend at any approved school their family chooses. Democratic leaders eventually accepted an offer to extend the vouchers to 7,500 children for the first year and 15,000 the second. But the Indiana State Teachers Association is now backing a suit against the state, saying the law is unconstitutional. Tonight, we'll look at the state's voucher program and the impact it may have on Indiana's learning landscape as we put education in focus. And thanks for joining us for this edition of In Focus. I'm Stan Jastrzebski. If you have questions for one of our studio experts during tonight's program, please email them to us at infocus@indiana.edu or leave your comments on our website. That's indianapublicmedia.org/infocus. Well, after a landmark legislative session, the Indiana Department of Education is now defending itself against claims that the comprehensive education reforms it promoted violate the federal and state constitution. Arguably receiving the most attention is Indiana's voucher program. And while officials agree there is no silver bullet solution to Indiana's education woes, WTIU's Alex Roy reports the benefits of the state's voucher program could be overshadowed by controversy.
Disagreement is dominating discussion about the voucher program in Indiana. 3,200 students have applied for vouchers and will be or already are attending a private school, many of them with religious affiliation, using taxpayer dollars. The Indiana State Teachers Association is suing the state on the grounds the Choice Scholarship Program violates Article 1 of Indiana's Constitution, which says state tax dollars cannot directly fund religious institutions.
That religious institution is going to have a religious element in pretty much everything it does. I taught in parochial schools before I began my public school career, and I know that there was an element of faith in everything I taught.
Meredith says that is not where the money should be going. All but 6 of the 242 private schools participating have religious affiliations. But it's the state's contention that education dollars should follow a child's learning needs, whether it be in a public, non-public, or religious institution.
No one is being forced to attend a religious school. This legislation simply gives parents a choice. It gives them the opportunity to use the money that is already directed to their children's education.
The ISTA filed a preliminary injunction aimed at halting the program before the school year started. But last week, a Marion County judge denied the motion.
The folks that are involved in advocating for school choice are well connected and are national organizations, and we're very familiar with case law and what happened in other states or jurisdictions, and they try to avoid those same pitfalls with Indiana's new law.
At an average of $5,000 per student, and with 7,500 vouchers available in the first year, that's $37 million public schools will no longer have. But the state says that's a non-issue because those students won't be counted in the funding formula anymore.
That schools should receive funding for the children that they actually educate. So I think that at the end of the day, like I said, what this program does is it gives families of lesser means the same choice that families of greater means have.
Families at 150% of the free and reduced lunch level are eligible to apply for vouchers. Meredith says if religious institutions were not allowed to participate, she may not oppose a voucher program, but would still argue the funding piece.
Some of our most challenged students have even less support in their schools to give them the resources and the remediation and the programs that they need in order to catch up and close that, we begin to close that achievement gap. I just think it's the wrong time to even have the conversation about vouchers.
Whether voucher programs actually promote academic success is an entirely different story.
Generally, though, the parents are very active and involved, and student enthusiasm is pretty high because they've made that active choice to be enrolled in that private school. So from that standpoint, buy-in and support, attendance is up usually, and therefore that does sometimes lead to better academic outcomes for those kids.
The ISTA says it will move forward with the lawsuit, but for now, several thousand children are beginning classes as part of the largest first-year voucher program in United States history. For WTIU News, I'm Alex Roy.
And my co-host for this evening is Kyle Stokes. He's an education reporter for State Impact Indiana. Kyle, good evening. Tell us who you're talking to tonight.
Yeah, good evening, Stan. We're speaking tonight to Dick Comer, who is a senior attorney for the Institute of Justice. He's been on the side of the state of Indiana throughout this voucher lawsuit, and he's been heavily involved in this litigation, despite the fact that he's been in Washington the entire time. But he does have extensive experience in school voucher lawsuits. We'll ask him about it coming up here later on in Focus. Right now, let's send it back to you, Stan, and our in-studio panel.
Thanks, Kyle. And joining us in studio tonight, our attorney and policy analyst, Rebecca Billick, education philosophy professor with the Indiana University School of Education, Barry Bull, and Mike Baldamero, who's the head of school at Lighthouse Christian Academy here in Bloomington. Thanks to the three of you for being here. Rebecca, I want to start with you. If you can, quickly, can you give us sort of Vouchers 101? Where have they been tried before? What are some of the different methods that have been used, and how have those things fared in terms of improving educational outcomes?
Well, I'm not really, the focus of our research to date wasn't really on whether or not vouchers was a good idea or a bad idea over at the Center for Education and Policy, Evaluation and Policy. What our focus was what has happened in other states. And what's really notable and what a lot of people, I believe, tend to miss in the debate about school vouchers is that the constitutions of each state are very different. And what is allowed in one state isn't necessarily going to be a good comparison to what's allowed in Indiana. So we have approximately 24 school choice programs of some kind throughout the country. But, like I said, the constitutions of each of those states are very different. So what happens in one state necessarily isn't applicable to what happens in Indiana.
My next question, we'll go down to Mike first, and we'll come back down the line here. You heard Teresa Meredith in our opening package there say that the contention from the Indiana State Teachers Association and that side of the lawsuit is this may be going against separation of church and state as outlined by the Indiana Constitution. You're the head of a religious school here in town. I'd like your opinion first, and then Barry's, and then Rebecca's, on how that argument breaks down in your mind.
Sure. A number of schools are religious schools. Lighthouse Christian Academy doesn't make any apology for that. That's part of our curriculum. And as she said, faith is a real part of everything that happens in our classrooms. But I think there's a distinction between what happens in our classrooms and the way the legislation was written. It was written to support parent choice and designed to promote what they would like to see in education. And that's where we lean on the whole subject.
Barry, your thoughts?
Well, honestly, this is really an abstract legal issue here. I suspect that my opinions about this don't really matter. I think that however the law comes down, I, as an education researcher, am really concerned about the ultimate effects on student performance, on parental satisfaction, and so on. And I think that's where the real issues for me lie.
Rebecca, as an attorney, what are some of the ways you could see looking at either side of this case?
Well, we spent a lot of time researching this, and actually when I approached the issue, my gut was telling me this was not legal, that you couldn't do this, it would be against Indiana's Constitution. But when looking at Indiana's Constitution, the new statutes really are for the benefit of education, not for religion. And in Cleveland, the argument was made that, that because there's religious education, or the most of the money goes to religious schools, that's a problem. But bottom line, it comes down to parent choice. And people of all means should be able to choose where they want to educate their children.
You bring up an interesting point, which is means, and I'd like to go to Barry first on this. One of the criticisms I've heard from parents that I know who are thinking about sending their own children to voucher schools here in the state, in this case, the most recent conversation I had was with a friend of mine who lives in Hamilton County. They said, well, you know, one of the problems we have is that we can get some of the money, but we're above the lowest income bracket, so we can't get all of the money that is allocated to the lowest income people who are applicable for this program, so they don't necessarily get enough financial benefit to be able to send their son where they might like to send him. Is that a problem with this going forward?
Well, in some ways it is. The reality is that even with this voucher program, parental choice and therefore parental satisfaction are constrained. The intention is not to provide a full scholarship for anybody who wants to send their child to a private school. There are restrictions on income, and therefore the benefits for low-income folks are stronger or higher than they are for high-income folks. But that's only one aspect of the constriction on choice included in this system. For example, parents around the state are not free to send their children to any public school that they want. So that general open enrollment has not been provided in the state of Indiana, and that may in fact, that restriction may be even more important constraint on parental choice than the income ceilings.
It sounds like what you're talking about is not necessarily a level playing field between public schools and charter or voucher schools in terms of the students they can attract.
In some ways, the public schools are not, haven't been included in this choice plan. So parents can either go to their local public school or choose any other private school in the state that they want. But what they can't do is choose any other public school in the state that they want. They are constrained by the law to attend public school in their geographic area.
Mike, I'm interested what you're hearing from parents about the criticism that I heard from a friend of mine. You said you've got about 6 students who are going to be using vouchers at the moment that you know of to attend Lighthouse for this coming year. Mm-hmm. Are you hearing from parents that there perhaps are more of them who would like to, but there are these income guidelines which maybe don't make it quite as feasible as it might if it were more open to everybody?
The conversation that comes up a little bit more is less to do with finances and financial constraints, as Barry was just talking about. It has more to do with agreeing with the philosophies and the mission statements of the schools that are a part of it. In Bloomington, we have 4 schools. Pinnacle is one school with just several, I believe 3 who are voucher students. Clear Creek Christian has 3. St. Charles at present doesn't have anyone enrolled under the voucher program. And we have 6 who are kindergarten through 12th grade. The phone calls that come in to ask us about the voucher program have more to do with qualification, but then asking a lot more about the school and finding out about the school to inform them of what a school like ours is like, a non-public school, in our case a Christian school. The 4 schools that I mentioned, 3 of them are faith-based, 1 is not.
Rebecca, I want to start out with you and then move down the panel for this next question. Based on your research, would it be a good idea to try to open the voucher program to as many families as possible, perhaps regardless of income constraints, to see that this is truly a choice program for as many people are sending their children to school as possible? Or is it better the way the state of Indiana has done it, where it's constrained by total number of students who can apply and by income level?
Well, I think you have to be careful in using the word better, because in the course of our research, so many of the research programs or the efficacy studies on school choice programs are flawed because they don't use correct research models. They're very skewed and driven by the politics of the people behind them. So it's difficult to use that word in this context. But that said, I kind of take issue with the level playing field as it was discussed earlier, because the bottom line is there's a lot of subsidies in this state for a lot of different things, and a lot of sliding fee scales for a lot of things, and it levels the playing field when you do take into consideration what each family makes and therefore potentially what they can afford. If you start giving the same funding to everybody regardless of income, then you're almost making the playing field stay as it is, uneven.
Barry?
I'd just like to emphasize something that Mike said. The playing field may or may not be leveled economically, but perhaps the real issue is the kind of school that is available for parents to choose from. And that may be a greater concern about whether the playing field is or is not level. So parents are constrained in their choice to their local public schools combined with their local private schools, but they do not have the choice to go to schools in Martinsville or schools in Mooresville if they find those schools attractive, either public or private. So this is, I think, more than an economic or an income issue.
Mike, your thoughts on opening this up to more families, regardless of geography or income or what have you?
From a general perspective, I'd like to see it opened up as broadly as possible. I'm not sure how fiscally responsible that would be for the state. There is a fiscally neutral approach they have to use in the numbers that you just mentioned, between 7,500 this year, 15,000 the next year, and the third year. There is no cap. That's part of a strategic plan, looking at the entire process. But yes, it was mentioned a little bit earlier. I think one of the focuses needs to be student success and parents' estimation of what is student success in conjunction with the schools that they attend. And to that degree, I think that the door should be opened. Yeah.
All right, I want to get back to this discussion in just a minute, but right now we need to head over to the WFIU studios and to Kyle Stokes and his guest. Kyle?
Yes, Stan, we'd like to bring into another voice into the conversation here, a bit of an insider voice as well. His name is Dick Comer, and as we introduced him at the beginning of the show, he's a senior attorney for the Institute of Justice, which is a Washington-based organization that's been supporting a lot of states trying to implement similar school voucher programs. Mr. Comer, welcome to the program.
Hi, I'm delighted to be here.
So you've been very involved in the Indiana litigation here. I'd like to, just for the benefit of our audience, maybe you can tell me how you've been involved with the lawsuit that's been ongoing here in Indiana.
Well, first we had an advisory role in sort of the drafting and creation of the original legislation. We were asked by the Foundation for Educational Excellence in Indianapolis to sort of write a constitutional law paper on whether a scholarship program was feasible in Indiana. We thought it was. And now we are representing parents as defendant interveners, parents who are receiving scholarships for their kids to attend private school under the program. So we are aligned with the state, helping to defend them from the attack from the teachers' unions, basically.
I'd like to pull out a certain amount of that statement that you just made, because it gets to a very critical point that is sort of at the center of this case. It basically hinges, so you argue that it's not for that this program isn't necessarily for the benefit of the parent of the schools rather, but for the benefit of the parents. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, it's like school choice programs in a lot of other states. I mean, it specifically provides benefits to the parents and empowers them to purchase an education from private schools or, in fact, from other public school districts.
It's a distinction, though, that I think to a lot of people seems to parse the issue, because ultimately this money ends up in the hands of religious institutions, and that's state money, taxpayer dollars. Isn't that right?
That's right, in the sense of it's taxpayer dollars when it's given to the family, and then it becomes family dollars when they pay it to the school. But in principle, all that this does is extend to the K through 12 educational level the same principles that we have been using for decades at the post-secondary education level. including state programs in Indiana. The Constitution of Indiana does not distinguish between higher and lower education, yet Indiana has been providing scholarships, means-tested scholarships, to Indiana college students to attend any public or private institution in the state of Indiana, including Notre Dame and, any number of, I think there's about 28 or 29 religious colleges that kids are attending. But nobody thinks of these as aid to religious colleges. They're aid to the students who are eligible. Same thing with the federal Pell Grants those students receive and Stafford student loans.
Well, let me throw in another element here, and forgive me for boiling down a lot of case law here, but essentially there's a Colorado case that says that these types of programs are constitutional so long as there are adequate non-religious options. But in Indiana, it's been well noted that the program is overwhelmingly populated with religious schools.
Actually, that Colorado case that you're referring to distinguish between pervasively religious schools and non-pervasively religious schools, and that distinction has actually been thrown out by the 10th Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. So that's no longer a part of the Colorado program. The Colorado program now functions exactly like Indiana's program does, which is it makes no distinction whatsoever between religious colleges and secular colleges.
In the very brief amount of time that we have left, Mr. Comer, I'm wondering if you can address some of the concerns of the panel that while legally you can make the argument that this program is for the benefit of parents and students, that it isn't necessarily bringing greater benefit to divert all of this money away from public institutions towards private and parochial schools.
Oh, on the contrary. I mean, the problem that we have experienced with public education is that it is, in fact, a public monopoly system, and it will benefit greatly from increased competition in the same way that higher education benefits from the fact that private colleges exist and compete with public colleges for students. What we have, unfortunately, is the result of what we always get from a monopoly, which is high cost and low quality. And despite the fact that Indiana has far more than doubled its educational expenditures in the last 30 years in constant dollars, Indiana public education has not improved, and it's time to try something different.
Okay. Mr. Comer, thank you so much for joining us here today on InFocus.
Thank you for having me.
That was Dick Comer. He is a senior attorney at the Institute of Justice, and he's involved in the Indiana school voucher lawsuit on behalf of the state of Indiana, so he's defending the school voucher program. Stan, let's send it back to you.
Thanks, Kyle. I want to bring up something that Mr. Comer said at the end there, which is the idea of competition. I was thinking about it, and I thought, if you were to extend this to a lot of schools who have the opportunity to take voucher students, theoretically, parents could, by acclamation, choose which are the best schools, because theoretically, the parents are going to want to send their students to the best educational opportunity they can find in the area that is available to their student. Barry, I'll start with you on this. Would it work that way? Could you force out the worst performing schools, and we don't have to go through what Tony Bennett is going through today with canceling some schools around the state?
Actually, we do have some research that throws light on this. The programs in Milwaukee and Cleveland have been going the longest. And so they have generated a fair amount of data about student performance. And what the researchers say is that the vouchers do not make student test scores improved, and they do not make them go down. So that the actual effect on student performance is non-existent. So I honestly think that the issue of improvement of student performance, while it sometimes, as with Mr. Comer, gets mentioned, is really not of real concern, because vouchers do not improve student performance from everything we can see.
Let me put this out to all of you in general. You heard Alex Dameron from the Department of Education in our beginning package say that what this program does is allows parents more choice in how they're going to spend the educational dollars that go to their children. We've had a number of people on this very program who have told us parents are not nearly involved enough in their children's lives, especially in their children's education, which to me begs the question, are parents able to do the research that would be necessary to send their children to the best schools and make adequate use of the voucher program to its fullest extent? Rebecca, why don't we start with you on that?
Well, I again want to caution that I think a lot of the research that's been done hasn't been done eliminating a lot of the things that can contaminate the research. So whether or not they're improving test scores or not, the research shows that the kids who are often choosing to go to voucher schools have many more disabilities, have many more behavioral problems, and or they're behind when they get to the new school, and so it takes a while for them to catch up. And then there's also selection issues, selection bias that happens. So I think a lot of the studies really show that we can't definitively say one way or the other that vouchers don't improve students. And then to go back to what you just asked me, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Whether parents are involved enough to know how vouchers would best benefit their child.
And there's actually some more research out there. What happens when a student wants to change and they don't have a parent that's involved? So if you have a parent who doesn't speak English well or who doesn't want to switch schools or choose a school, and you've got a student that does, how are we going to cater to those students? And then in New York there's been difficulty. They don't have school choice, but in the way we're talking about it, but they have in New York City a large problem with schools reporting accurately what they have to offer for the students. And so how are parents going to get the information that they need? And one of the recommendations that the Center for Education and Evaluation Policy has made is that the Department of Education really aggressively find a neutral party to maintain a database for parents and students so that they can make educated decisions about where their kids should be.
Mike, I want to ask you real quick in just our last 15 or 20 seconds, if a parent came to you and it was clear that they want to go to Lighthouse Christian, but you think they might not necessarily get the most for their child, despite the fact your school would benefit from having that child's voucher, could you see yourself turning someone away?
It's a very fair question, and yes, through our admissions process, which is very much separate from the whole voucher process, yes, we have had some parents and students who it was not a good fit based on philosophy, based on those things. So yes, that has happened.
All right. Well, my thanks to the three of you this evening. You've been a great help in trying to suss out how this program works, and I expect there will be a number of more discussions that go on about this as it goes along. Thanks also to Kyle Stokes, my co-host for this evening. Kyle, yeoman's work, well done.
Thank you very much, Stan. It was a pleasure.
Please do send us your questions for next month's program to infocus@indiana.edu. You can also leave a comment or see portions of this show by visiting our website, indianapublicmedia.org/infocus. And thanks also to all of you who watched and listened. Have a nice night.
Production support for InFocus is provided by Smithville, a locally owned business serving central and southern Indiana since 1922 with residential and business internet, voice, and security services. Smithville, local pride, global technology. Information at smithville.net. Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for central and southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you.